righty, well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our hot glass demo here at the Corning Museum of Glass. My name's Caitlin, we've got Helen, we've got Chris, and there's Amanda over there on the computer. And this demo is part of our live streaming series, which is called Bring the Heat. And so what we're going to be doing today is making some wonderful bottles. You'll see some examples of them on the bench over here and right here. And bottle stoppers that are in the form of imps and angels. So a little bit of glassy good and evil happening here at the museum this morning. So here's a little angel character on a beautiful bottle with flowers, and we got this wonderful flaming bottle with a little imp on the top of that with some flames sticking out from there. And so we're going to be working with different techniques and different types of glass to do this. So you know, we've been all living in this crazy pandemic for such a long time, and it doesn't necessarily bring out the best in us. And so I think it's a good reminder that we're all made up of a little bit of goodness, a little bit of not so goodness. And so that's an inspiration for our theme today, which is about differences. Different things that if you can figure out how to put them together in just the right combination, you can end up making something that's really kind of great. And so we are going to be working with two different glass making techniques, two different types of glass. And while we do this over the next hour or two, we'll have some conversations about the differences and also the similarities in the ways that we work with glass. So Helen, would you like to start talking about what you're going to make?
Absolutely. Thanks, Caitlin. So this has really been a fun collaboration that Caitlin and I have been working over the last month or so, trying to put together. And so I'm really excited to actually get us both in the same room. We're often working in separate areas. So yeah, she's going to be working on these beautiful characters today, and I'm going to be working on a couple bottles for us today, starting out with the flame texture and design. It looks like a really complicated pattern, but it is somewhat easy to actually accomplish, so it's a little bit of magic that goes into that one. So I'll be focusing on a flame-shaped bottle, and then I'll also be working on a cloud bottle. So those are the two themes that I'm working in today. But we're going to have a lot of fun kind of bringing in some of the techniques and designs and talking about the different approaches that we have. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and get started, get those torches lit up, get the flames going. And I'm going to get started with the color wrap that's going to be attached to the outside of my piece.
And I'm going to start working with some color as well. One of the things that you'll see us doing throughout is various applications of layers of color and also stripes. So we'll have some, I think we're doing 4 different striping techniques by the time we're done with this. And so, and also a couple different ways that we can apply color to the surface of the glass. So I'm starting out with a bit of clear glass that's already been heated a little bit and gathered up into a kind of oval shape. I'm going to warm it up in my 4,000 degree flame here, and then I'm going to apply a layer of white glass to the surface of it.
I also want to give a shout out to, of course, our online community that's joining us virtually here today. If you have any questions, if you are in-house, Chris will help field those questions, so feel free to raise your hand, get our attention. We're happy to help you out with that. And then, of course, Amanda's going to be manning the computer, so those of you joining us online, feel free to interject those questions online, and she'll field them to us as well. And we, of course, got Brad upstairs. He's going to be doing all the video work for us today. We've given him a real challenge, given multiple spots to focus on, but he'll hopefully be able to capture all the action for you. If there's anything that you went to go get a cup of coffee or something you missed, don't worry, we're going to put all this on our YouTube channel eventually as well, so you can reference all of this action later on at your convenience. But you're getting started with some striping, some overlay technique, Caitlin?
Yeah, I'm starting out with just a layer of white glass over the surface of the clear, so not stripes yet, but then I will put some stripes on this after that. I'm going to be making a few different parts throughout the demo. They're not all going to be part of the finished piece, but there's a couple different things I wanted to show you. And there's not time to make 2 whole characters. So the first thing I'm going to do is make a pair of pants. They're going to be striped pants, and I kind of love the steps of this process, which is why I want to show it to you. And then those pants are not actually going to be part of the final process, but it gives you a chance to see some fun things about how the color can be applied and how the glass can be moved around to get some interesting color patterning. And that will be visually similar to what Helen's doing in her flame bottle, but you'll see that it actually is accomplished in slightly different ways. So in my process, in this demo, I'm using all solid application of glass and not blown glass. And so the approach is slightly different in terms of how to get the glass to move and create the patterns.
So as you're painting on the color from the outside to create that encasement of the glass, we're working on the bit that's going to be wrapped around the outside of the fire vessel. So I'm starting out with just a little bit of a white color, and Chris is going to heat up 2 different colors to stripe onto the outside of this white bit, and then once we get those layered up, we'll be able to use that wrap. So very similar, but we don't start with just the rods. We're actually working with big chunks of glass, solid colored glass, and we needed to warm that up slowly. It's one of the biggest differences, I think, not biggest, but one of the differences in working with the methodology that Caitlin's working. She can pick up a rod of her choice and kind of get it a little warm in the flame and bring it into the conversation of what she's doing. But here we need to have a little bit more time to warm up those big chunks of color and then start to get them molten. So Chris is going to bring me over an opaque red and a transparent gray. That's going to be the 3 colors going on to my wrap.
Well, and that introduces a really interesting part of this discussion, I think, which is that we're working with 2 different types of glass, and they behave in different ways because they have different formulas. So Helen and Chris are using soda lime glass, and the glass I'm working with is called borosilicate. So the borosilicate is able to withstand more dramatic temperature changes than soda lime glass, which is one of the reasons that I'm able to heat it up fairly rapidly. But it's also because of the way that the glass is shaped and the way that I'm approaching the flame. So it's certainly possible to flame work soda lime glass or furnace blow borosilicate, but one of our interesting challenges for this demo was that we wanted to use 2 different glasses that are not going to be joined together physically, but we're going to make an object that the 2 parts belong together because of the design elements.
Yeah, that was one of my first challenges when we started this project, is that Caitlin would bring these amazing characters, and then I would want to try to figure out how to match the bottles and vice versa. And matching some of the colors became really challenging because even though, all glasses use metallic oxides to create those colors, typically you're going to find slightly different color palettes in borosilicate than you would in the soft glass or the soda lime glass. So the red in particular, I was finding very challenging to try to find a matching color to complement the wings and the characters that she was working on. But I think we found a pretty good match.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, the reason that you'll see quite a few bottles and characters sitting around here is that this has been a really fun ongoing development. We didn't just go, okay, we're going to make this, and now we make it. We went back and forth a number of times with making parts and looking at them together and figuring out what we might want to adjust. So these striped pants are really, really fun. And it's almost where the beginning of our conversation started, is that we both really love the striped pants. But you'll see in the end, the piece that I'm making is not going to have striped pants because it looks better with the complex pattern on the bottle to have solid color pants. So down the line, because we both, I think, want to keep working on this idea, somewhere down the line, we may come up with a combination where the striped pants come back into the story. But that was part of the interesting, development of the idea too, of looking at what the other person is doing and then responding to it, and doing that over and over again. And that's how the design develops, is getting to continue the conversation over a long period of time.
Yeah, I remember the first time I walked into the back office and you had that little guy with those peppermint pants. I just fell in love. Those little striped pants. They were so cute. And we had already talked a little bit about a collaboration before that point, and I think I agree with you. That was kind of a solidifying moment to really see some of the things that we could inspire and move forward, in our design process.
Well, and plus, when I'm doing demos here at the museum, anytime people walk up and I say to them, I'm making some pants, that gets a pretty good laugh, because you're not usually expecting to see glass pants when you go to a demo. But it's definitely fun. So I put the white layer of glass on here. I put some blue-green stripes on the surface, and I'm melting those in. And then I'm going to attach a second handle and then twist it all so that it makes a nice spiral stripe pattern.
Yeah, Chris is just now bringing me my second color. You can see Caitlin was able to get all those stripes put on pretty quickly onto her character. I'm still working on warming up glass. But part of setting up this wrap is that I want to make sure that I can see all three colors at once as it wraps around the surface of the bottle.
Oh, okay.
So I need to be really careful the way that I'm squishing these colors together so that I get a nice even spacing. And when you're working with different colors, they're going to react in the heat slightly differently as well. So having stiff colors, soft colors sitting next to each other or layered on top can make that a little more complicated in the way that you approach the colors. And I imagine that's very similar in flame working as well.
Yeah, definitely. There are definitely colors that behave very nicely and other ones that are challenging to work with. And actually, we just got a question online about what kind of white glass I'm using. And the color that I'm using is Chinese jade white. And I particularly love this color. I will use it every day if I have the chance, because it's a little bit translucent. And so it gives you some whiteness on the surface of the glass that will reflect light, but some light passes through it, particularly if you put a thin application of it over clear. And so you get an almost sort of opalescent effect from it that I think shows off the glass beautifulally, but also allows you to see the form better than if you had just plain clear glass that you're working with. It's a very soft, smooth, flowing glass, and so it's easy to apply to the surface of the clear. And as borosilicate colors go, it's a fairly inexpensive one too, which is also kind of nice, because then you're not feeling nervous about using a lot of it. And then the blue-green that I've added is I think it's called peacock, so it's a nice dark blue-green. So I've twisted up those stripes, and I'm just adjusting the ends of this sort of football-shaped blank. Once I get both the ends sort of tidied up, I'm going to heat it and let it droop into almost like a kind of fortune cookie shape, and that's how the pants get started.
All right, so I'm almost done with my wrap, and we're actually going to put this away into our garage. We often make parts and components, and we need to keep those warm so that they don't end up blowing up. So we're going to put them away into our garage for safekeeping. That's another advantage, I think, of borosilicate glass, is that you can have some parts and components that you don't necessarily need to keep the same kind of temperatures in all the time. So Caitlin has prepared a lot of things in advance and had some examples and things on the table, but if she chose to put those back into her design, she's able to.
Yeah, I love focusing on small parts in all the glass work I do. And in fact, my original background in glass was as a bead maker, and so that is, absolutely about modular parts, small parts that you can put a lot of attention into the individual part, and then put that together into more complex combinations. And so in preparation for this demo, I did make quite a few, sort of partial bodies, some extra pants. I've got some wings and some flames, and that gives me a sort of safety net in case while I'm building something here it doesn't work out very well, but it also gives me a selection of parts that I can put together. Now I'm getting that super hot right in the middle and trying to keep those very little tapered ends fairly firm, keeping them a little bit out of the flame. And then in just a minute, I'm going to let this droop, and that's probably the most fun part of this particular step of the process. So just making sure it's super hot. Usually I heat it until I think it's ready, and then I heat it a little bit more, because if I let it droop before it's soft enough, it's not going to make a nice shape, and I won't be able to go back to where I was with it in a nice straight line. So we're letting that droop, letting the little legs stretch out and the very fat belly sort of drop down toward the table. And this is really still soft, very soft, so I'm just holding it still for a minute until it firms up, and then I can start removing those handles. So we got our striped pants and tiny little legs. This is one of the things about this design that always makes me laugh, is that they're kind of round, Humpty Dumpty looking characters, and I like them to have very tiny feet, because they're way more silly that way than they would be if they had bigger feet. So my goal here is to make them as silly looking as possible.
I like that philosophy. So now that we've got our wrap all ready to go, now we can actually start working on the vessel itself. And for those of you who might not have seen the methodology in which we are actually blowing glass these days, we can no longer actually blow into the blowpipes because we're all wearing masks. So instead, we've created this new blowing system that's involving a foot pedal and a blow hose and the air compressor. And it's pretty low pressure. And sometimes the hose falls off. But this is how we're blowing glass these days. So I'm just going to add a little air pressure and start a starter bubble. And we're actually going to be doing an overlay here. So I'm really just creating a foundation bubble that Chris is going to drop a small amount of glass for me onto the top of this bubble. And this is how we encase the glass, the colored glass, generally overlaying blobs of glass over top of small bubbles, rather than taking and striping the color on like Caitlin has to do to coat and do an encasement.
Well, and that's an interesting thing too about the differences and similarities. I'm in this situation working with solid glass, but it is of course possible to blow glass at the torch. And in fact, my earliest design for these characters was a hollow formed character, and I was working on this last year, a year and a half ago or so. I was working on the design for that. And if I was blowing glass and putting stripes on it, the striping technique might be more similar to what Helen and Chris are doing, because that has more to do with the solid or hollow glass than it has to do specifically with the type of glass or the process. How long have I been doing this for? I have been working on this since about 10 o'clock. And, no, I'm just teasing you. Yeah. I've been working with glass for about 25 years. Can you believe it? That's a long time, isn't it? And one of the neat things about it is that even though it's been that long, I have not yet run out of interesting things to learn about it. It's a kind of forever ongoing, fascinating, and challenging process.
Absolutely. Every day I come into the studio, I learn something new. Now we've got that small blob added to the top of my bubble. I'm just going to squish this glass up and around the surface of that bubble to create that encasement. And then we can start adding more clear glass, building up the amount that we'll need, and then we can add that wrap and start blowing out the bottle.
All right, so we got some stripy pants, and as I said, these are not going to be the pants that I'm going to use, but I do want to show you one more step of this process where I'm going to attach the ends of the legs to a little marble shape, and that will be my connection to the bottle stopper eventually. One of the interesting challenges, and this took me a while to kind of develop an idea of how to get this to work, as I mentioned, I want the feet to be really small because they look funnier that way than if they were big. On the other hand, when you join two bits of glass, you've got to make sure that they have both flowed together. Otherwise, they're going to break apart. And especially because these characters are kind of heavy because they are solid glass, and I'm making this dainty little connection, I have to be super attentive to making sure that the connection is strong. But I want it to look dainty. So I'm trying to create a little bit of an optical illusion as I'm doing this of delicacy, even though I'm setting it up to be strong. And so I just put a little bit of the blue-green glass on the ends of those legs, and that's going to be the color of the shoes. So that's going to be the glass that actually attaches to the marble shape where it gets fused together. And you can imagine if you're fusing together two bits of glass, they kind of get sort of smushed looking. And so what I've put on there is not the actual shoes, but just the setup color for the shoes. And then once I get it on, get it all attached, I will go in there and very delicately apply little tidbits of glass until I can build out the toes and the heels, so that it ends up looking like the little imp is standing on the marble, but we'll know that it's actually melted together. Those are the kinds of puzzles that I love about working with glass, is taking what you know about what the glass will do and what the glass requires, and figuring out how to get that to fit into your own, sort of desires about what you want it to look like.
And I really love that solution that you've come up with those tiny little points. You can get their little pointy toes attached into it. It really does make a difference. I always find that to be a challenging thing for myself when we're attaching characters or objects and things to the glass itself and doing a lot of sculptural elements. It's that connection that's so important. And if you don't get that connection just right, you'll either squish or mush it in, or creating an environment for things. So it's an elegant solution you've come up with for sure.
And to get to that, I made a lot of very inelegant looking shoes. So yeah, over and over again, I would try different ways to assemble it, and I would, often they would break, other times they would look bad, and so yeah, getting to do it over and over and over again, what a luxury, and that's how the design can develop. So I've got that marble shape real hot, and the little connection is very hot as well. Just kind of rounding it out a little bit, and then I'll let that firm up, and I can start working on the toes a little. In which case I'll be using a much smaller flame. So this is also one of the great things about the flame working process, is that I can get so close up to it because the heat is so directional. That's a 4,000 degree flame, but there's not a whole lot of heat radiating out from the sides of it. And especially when I'm doing really small detail work like the toes, I can get even closer to it because it's a much smaller flame. And so to me, this has a feeling of being almost like drawing or painting. And it's easy to sort of cozy up to the flame to do it.
So I've got my first gather of glass. I've got one more gather. And then Chris is actually going to take the bit that we made ahead of time. And we just put the 3 colors together, but we want to encase it. So after we wrap this onto the surface, it will be right on the surface of the glass. And sometimes those colors can mash together and be a little less structural. So it's nice to kind of shellac them with clear glass. So he's got to slowly warm that bit back up. He'll gather some more clear glass on top of it, and then we'll have it nice and hot to be able to wrap around. So part of it is the timing and the coordination of putting all these things together.
I've got a little bleb on my glass, just a tiny little bit of that green touched down to the marble where I don't want it. And that's one of my favorite glass words, bleb, because it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a little bit of glass that's not where it's supposed to be, and so you can say, oh, I got a bleb. So that's what I'm doing here, is just picking that off of there.
It's not always what you can make, it's what you can fix, right?
Yep. So I'm just sort of picking away by adding one little bit and then another little bit, and I'm building up the glass for the shoes, but at this point not touching it down to the marble, because if I touch the glass down when it's not hot enough to flow, it can stick, but it won't. If it's not flowing together, it'll end up breaking apart later. It'll end up making a crack in the marble. So I'm very carefully not touching the marble with the colored glass yet. And then once I get enough glass in place for the shoes, I'll melt them a little bit more and then get them a little partially fused on there, and then stretch them to make the little points for the toes. It's really, really slow, and I kind of love that about it.
One of the contrasts we were talking about similarities and differences in the approach to working with glass is so often I, as a gaffer, I really rely on an assistant to help me bring bits, bring additions, bring a punty. There's all these components. But flame working, you can really be a little bit more independent, kind of work on your things at your own pace and be able to bring those own bits and things to yourself. So do you find that gives you a little bit more time, Caitlin, to really kind of think through processes, being able to not have someone else in the mix?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it probably is sort of a personality situation, because for me, I love being 100% focused on what I'm doing. And so being by myself when I work is great, or working alone without an assistant is great for me. But I think there's something also really joyful about working with a team and having that interaction with the other people that allows your process to grow in ways that it might not have otherwise.
It was certainly one of the things that really attracted me to glass at the very beginning. I started out in university. I'd never seen glass making before, didn't know it existed, but happened to meet a glass blower that invited me into the shop to show me what it was all about. And I was so enthralled with all the action, all the interaction, the people working together in collaboration to make this magical material come to life. And of course, just the material itself glowing. It's so really is something that draws you in and entices you to play with it. So I signed up for classes and kept working, but I've really have spent my career working with other people in creating designs and developing my individual voice still includes the addition of other people. So it's really fun to be able to do collaborations like this and we've known each other for a long time, Caitlin and I,
Yeah.
but we really haven't had much of a chance to collaborate at all. So this has been a really fun shift for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we found out that we have things in common that we might not have, really investigated before, so that's cool. So we got some stripy pants with shoes standing on a marble here, and I'm gonna just pop that in the oven and take out the red pants that are already prepared, and then continue with the torso.
And Chris has gotten that extra layer of clear glass on the outside of that wrap now. He's just going to get my color and temperature all set up, and then we'll go ahead and wrap this up.
So we've had two different stripe techniques so far. The one where I was twisting them, and the one where Helen, have you got your stripes on there already? You do.
I'm sorry?
Your stripes are on there already, right?
No, the stripes are on the bit, but we're just getting ready to add that bit to the outside to make that that stripe here in a second.
Yeah. So two different stripe techniques, and then the next thing I'm going to do is another way of building up stripes, where I'm going to put layers of color in stacks to make the torso.
So I've made sure, I know that both sides don't have the clean stripe. It's really focusing on one side because that's all I'm going to see. So I've heated this and tried to shape it in a way that I still have one side at least has a nice strong white stripe. Maybe one more flash on that, Chris, and we'll do one more quick little chill. Because I want to make sure that these are all side by side. I can see all three colors at once on that wrap. That's really what gives the dynamic nature to this design and some of the depth. We're using both transparent and opaques to get that final effect. So we've got this roller wrap machine that gives us a lot of control. There we go, beautiful, thank you. So that roller wrap really does an easy job of this process. We can adjust it. We got a brand new one actually from Spiral Arts, and it's fully adjustable, and you can just make the distance and the spacing between the wrap adjusting according to how the wheels are adjusted. So it's been a real pleasure to play with that thing over the last couple weeks. But now that I got that stripe, now I'm going to mess it up. I'm going to really put it into a mold, push it and pull it around. That'll give us the kind of a loopy effect that I'm looking for on the glass. And then once I have those use the mold to create creases, then I'm actually going to fold them in on themselves slightly. So spiraling all those straight ribs into more of a spiral effect will slightly overlap all of those colors, and that's where I get that fire effect.
Just put a stripe of, a layer, like a pancake layer of white onto the top of the flat top of the pants, and melted that in, and then we're letting it firm up, and I'm going to add a layer of transparent red. It's light red Elvis is the name of the color, and that's going to be the second stripe. So we got solid red pants, opaque, and then a white stripe, and then we're going to have a dark red stripe next.
So now I've got my ribs, and now I go for the fold. So spiraling on the marver, kind of folding those colors over onto themselves.
Ooh, that looks awesome.
Yeah, it's a fun technique, and as long as you get the wrap on there right, it works pretty well. And this is not something I've invented. It's been around for a long time, but it's definitely become a nice way to represent that flame. Some of the challenges working with this design is, you know, Caitlin and I we work together at the museum, but we're not working in the same space very often. So coming up with these designs and the themes that we wanted to, I know you made mention about every day you walk into your studio space and I've put a new bottle down or you've put a new character down, and so we just start drawing inspiration from the magic that happens behind the scenes, and then when we come together we can see how those are working, the idea, the colors. So it's been really fun to have this kind of secret Santa idea of design in some ways, where it just appears and then I can react to it and build upon something that you've started to develop as well.
Well, and here's a great example of it, I think. Here's one of the first color pattern bottles that Helen did. It's beautiful. It has wonderful stripes on it, and so there's a perfect logic to that being something to go with the striped pants that I was working on. But there's so much activity in that design, in that decoration on the bottle, that then it's not quite as easy to see the character because your eye is really drawn to the pattern. But then, so that was one of the early tries, which looks pretty cool, but then you see the flamey pattern next to it and you realize, oh, equally complex, but there's some subtlety in the color that lets your eye move from that to the figure as well. And that's one of the, kind of beautiful, fascinating things about working on a design either by yourself or with somebody else is as you take steps and see the results, you get to be kind of reinvigorated about the idea, and it can really grow.
So I'm just going to cut a little bit off the bottom of this just to clean up my pattern, make sure everything is the termination of the pattern is really nice at the very tip of that bubble. Thanks, Chris.
So I'm adding a second stripe of white, and then I will add one more red, and then we'll start shaping the head.
So it looks like the pattern came out real nice. I just need to get my heat and balance back into that glass before I start to actually inflate it. Smooth out the surface a little bit. And then return once again to that inflation device. And I know Caitlin had mentioned she had those blown characters at first and had to kind of shift gears because of not being able to do hollow work anymore. But I'm super excited to see this transition from those characters that we first started chatting with about what we could do to collaborate. I was really inspired by Caitlin's drawings. That's really what drew me into and asking her to collaborate with me, because I wanted to just help capture some of that amazing feelings of her characters into glass on maybe a larger scale or a collaborative scale. And at first we started talking about maybe just making components, kind of putting them together, maybe making some arms and I'll make the bodies, or how we could put these together as a collaboration. But I like that we were able to really work together to marry these designs together, but each component is completely independent. So it really shows off the things that I love about glass and the parts that I'm making, and it really shows off the things about glass that she really loves, and kind of has our own character in each part of it. But by finding those common threads, we're really tying them together as a whole.
Right. And when Helen says that I couldn't blow glass anymore, that's just because in the demo setup we have here at the museum for safety protocol during the pandemic, I'm doing all solid work. But yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to getting back to some blown figures down the line. And one of the interesting differences, of course, is that a solid work figurine like this is heavy, much heavier than than one that's hollow. And so the structural challenges, limitations, possibilities are different from one to the other. But the design is informed by my, as Helen said, by my drawing, and then also, the hollow form and the solid form have a lot of similarities in character, even though they are technically built a little differently. So I've got stripes for the torso, and I want to move some of the glass from the back side down into to create the butt. Basically, I've got a little bit of a wrinkle there in the color, and so I'm superheating that spot. The heat's traveling that way, so I'm pointing this directly into the flame just in that one area. And then once it's nice and soft, I can tilt it and let it start to move itself down. So we get this way a little bit of variation between the back side and the front side of the character, even though it started out fairly symmetrical. I'm going to start building the head with colorless clear glass, and then I'll put an overlay of the white on that.
So I'll jump in here a little bit for Helen while she's starting to work the neck into this bubble. She's using a tool called jacks right now to squeeze into the bubble and stretch it away from the blowpipe a little bit. Yes, he has used the jacks a lot for a lot of different moves, but there's one thing that we almost always do with every blown form, and that's create a constriction with the jacks right next to the blowpipe. That's a removal point, so everything that we create in a pipe needs to be broken free. And when we break the glass free, we don't want to damage the integrity of the form, so we always squeeze in a nice little, it's almost like a crease, but that's a good break-off point. And the jacks, you'll see as we work with them, quite a bit of smoke comes off from the metal tool, which is beeswax that we apply as a lubrication. It just helps that tool to glide on the hot glass. But you'll see as Helen starts to work this form, she's inflating at the same time. And this is a really great use for this inflation system. You heard her talk about how we're using compressed air right now with a foot pedal. And the pressure is pretty small. It's dialed down to, I think, under 2 psi at the moment. We can change it if we want. For larger scale pieces, we'll add a little bit more pressure. But it simply doesn't take much. And she's really careful. She's tapping on that pedal just little bits at a time to give a little bit of air pressure. You can easily overinflate at this stage when the glass is really, really hot.
I've certainly overinflated a few things over the last 6 months learning how to use this system.
It's definitely taken us some time to adapt to it. And I remember when we first came back after our long shutdown, we reopened to the public in July, and we had this system in place. What do you want?
The foot?
Oh, foot, okay. Yeah. And we had to figure out how much pressure we needed. There's a regulator on the system, but of course, when you're using your mouth to inflate, you don't know if it's 1 psi, 2 psi, or whatnot. So we had to play around with that system and figure out what was ideal for us.
So I've got a basic, nice, round, simple bottle. We're going to add a solid foot to this. And in general, when I first started coming up with these ideas of what the bottle designs were going to be, I felt like I needed to add a lot of detail, do a lot of fancy things. And after seeing some of the sketches that I did, and we'll talk a little bit more later in between when I can go over and show you some things about how we approach the design. But I started to figure out that I didn't need a lot of extra. I didn't need a lot of fancy things added to the surface of the bubbles. I, in general, find simplicity with complicated pattern to be a much better approach. So with having so much visual things going on with that particular pattern, I choose just to make the bottle itself really simple. That highlights the pattern more and gives more of a simple foundation for all the complication and the character that goes on top of it as well.
All right, so I've worked up a little gather of glass rolled through this. This is the same gray that you put on for the wrap?
Yeah, so number
Neutral
44
gray.
for you glass blowers out there, Reichenbach.
R44. So this will be a foot for the bottle that Helen's working on.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Looks like I got all 3 colors in that wrap.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, the contrast between that simple wrap of red that Caitlin was showing earlier, kind of our early inspiration from the peppermint pants fella. But I really love that we have found a way to move beyond some of those initial stages and start to find new inspiration. And I really do hope this is just the beginning. I feel like we're just starting to scratch the surface and really figure out some really fun combinations and processes. So Caitlin and I both commented this morning, and we hope this, just because we finished the demo doesn't mean we finished the collaboration. So I'm really excited to see where we take this in the future.
I'm shaping the head right now. A lot of the shaping actually takes place not in the flame.
All right.
Because you're working with heat that's going in one direction and gravity that's going in a different direction. And so to make a nice round head shape, I get it really, really hot, and then I take it out of the flame and let the heat that's inside the head help me with the shaping. So I'm turning it, I'm watching it. I can feel when it's really soft, I can feel as the weight shifts a little bit on the end of the rod. And so I'm waiting for it to get nice and firm before I stop turning it, because otherwise it's going to droop in some direction that is probably not the direction I want. So a lot of watching and waiting to get that head to the shape that it needs to be, even though it's an extremely simple shape. So I'm going to add some red glass for the arms next.
So Helen's moving right along here to the finishing side of the bottle. We've completed the work on the blowpipe, adding that gob of glass. She shaped it into a really nice crisp edge foot. And I'm creating a handle for her now called a punty. And when we attach this punty, you might notice, for the glassmakers out there, that we also have put some color glass on the punty. Some of the colors that we work with are what we refer to as soft. And really what that means is they start to soften very quickly with the heat. This gray is one of the softest colors that we have. And we found that putting a little bit of gray on the punty to match the gray on the foot, it just creates a more stable connection. Sometimes if you don't put the color on the punty and you just use a clear punty and you attach to a soft colored foot, it can peel away. Ready, Helen?
Yep.
The connection that we're making right now is one of the trickier ones, because you have to have it just right so it will stick and support the piece through the remainder of the process, but ultimately this punty needs to break free when we're done. So much of that has to do with just the right temperature, just the right shape, all of that. Helen has timed this as well so that her bottle is in its rigid state. We call that cold glass, and that just means 1,000 degrees. That's where this soda lime glass is rock solid, though. A quick little shock with that metal tool on that line, and
Let's get a little tap.
she'll put a little bit of water on there. This creates tiny stress cracks and a little vibration to do the rest. Nice job. So Brad Patoka is up in our AV booth, and he's the one tracking all the action with the cameras here. And if you're looking at the screens right now, you can see inside of this reheating furnace, and a great time to look and notice the opening that we just produced. And you do a lip wrap on this right after you...
Yeah, I'm
tweeze
going
and
to trim it
it?
first,
Okay.
though. Yeah. Yeah, I found that having so many different colors at the very top of this opening, it's nicer to put a lip wrap on there because then it gives an even playing field for the lip rather than all those soft and stiff colors fighting each other, wanting to shrink and expand and create unevenness at the top of my shape. So I'm going to trim this up and then we'll add a little lip wrap and that'll pretty much complete this particular bottle. And then I can start on the clouds.
And I'm working on the facial details right now. One of the things that I love about this way of making stripes by putting sort of pancakes together is that I can get really clean, crisp stripe patterns that look very geometric instead of having them sort of swirled together at all. But then it gets to the point where I've got the head, but it is, there's a straight line between the head and the top of the torso. And so this is another sort of illusory step where I put some white glass onto the face, not onto the torso, but onto the face, and then heat it and let it drop down. And it creates a nice little neckline, a nice little curve. Let's see if I can get that in front of the camera in the right direction. So it creates a nice curved neckline instead of a straight line there. It gives me a little bit more room for the nose and mouth.
So as Helen has been introducing some more heat back into that opening, she's tweezing the lip, pulling it a little bit thinner with those tweezers, and you're going to see her cut away those tweezer marks. So we call that tweezing and trimming. It's a really nice technique to thin the top of a form out at this stage. And while she's doing that, just like we added some gray glass for a foot to the bottom of this bottle, we're going to add a little bit of gray glass to the top. We call this a lip wrap. This is a really nice way to balance out the pattern. So you have that massive gray for the bottom. We'll put a little bit of gray detailing on the rim and then really tying in that whole flame pattern that Helen formed with the wrap earlier on.
And I'm leaving this one a little taller for you, Caitlin, just like you said. We were looking at some of the shapes, and she said she really liked how tall this last bottle. I've made maybe 2 or 3 of these, and I made some that had very little tops on them. And this taller shape really works well with the characters that she's chosen for this design because she puts these little flames on the bottom side. And so raising it up off the bottle a little bit just helps with that design, helping feature the flames and the other accoutrements she's adding to the bottom support structure of the actual stopper.
Well, and that's an interesting part of the process too, because the accoutrements never were part of the original plan, but the more times you make something, the more you kind of see things where you can go, oh, that could use a little something there, and to get it to interact with that nice fat bottle shape at the bottom instead of having a very vertical form. It's nice to have, something to look at that goes out horizontally, and so that starts to integrate the 2 parts in a nice way that grew out of the process. I'm going to make the eyes next, and the eyes are going to be made of a series of dots. And I'm starting with a little bit of transparent gray glass for the first layer of dots. It's a color that's kind of subtle, and when it's finished, you'll barely be able to see it because it's going to be covered up mostly by the next 2 layers. But it just creates a little shadow around the eye that I like. It makes the character look a little bit more probably vitamin deficient, but it gives the eyes a little bit of more activity to have that extra bit of color there.
I think one more heat on that. The lip just needs to be cleaned up a little bit, and then we'll be finished up with this bottle. So when I'm finished shaping the end, maybe I'll pause for a few seconds on the bench so we can get a good look at our pattern before we put it away in the oven. But it's the same colors, very similar to the bottles that I did before, so we can also look at that pattern as well. I'm finding the inside glass is moving too much, so I just want to get a little surface heat in there. There we go, that's better.
You all set, Helen?
I'm all set, Chris, thank you.
No problem.
All right, so there's our bottle. You can see all that overlap, got all three colors evident in it, and then that little bit of whoop flame at the top. So we're going to put this away into our annealing oven. We do need to cool this glass slowly under controlled conditions. So this will be an overnight cycle. It's not that thick. If it was really thick, we'd need to anneal it even longer.
So Helen's dripping just a little bit of water onto that punty to create little stress cracks. We're really careful at this point not to let water hit the piece or the foot. Those drops of water do create little checks. But it just weakens the punty connection, and it should break right off. A tiny tap, that's what we're looking for. And of course, we like to fire polish the bottom after a break off. That sharp divot on the bottom. Amanda's going to get a quick photo of that piece before we put it away. Thanks, Helen. The oven it goes. Helen, that's a beautiful bottle.
Oh, thank you.
Nice job.
All right, one in the oven. One in the oven. So before I get started on the next one, Caitlin and I wanted to take an opportunity. We're about halfway through now, at least to the time frame. So welcome again to everyone online. If you're joining us online, and those of you who've joined us in-house here, my name's Helen. This is Caitlin. We've got Chris helping as well here today. And Amanda is on the online presence. So if you've been asking online questions, that's Amanda as well. So thanks for helping us out today. And Brad's upstairs really getting the challenge today, having to focus in on so many places, so many ways of seeing here at the museum. So thanks for joining us. I hope you've been enjoying it. But we wanted to talk just a little bit about some of our different approaches to the way that we design and come up with designs, I guess. That's not a really good way of saying it. But we were looking at our sketchbooks as a starting point and a conversation that we'd had about sketchbooks. And Caitlin, being also such a skilled illustrator, you work a lot with on paper, and even then bringing those concepts onto paper again, tying themes together and such like that. So she's drawn out a few steps here to really show the process that she was going to show us today. But one of the biggest contrasts that I think we discovered is my approach to using paper is a little bit different from your approach to using paper, because I often use mine as kind of a brainstorming place, which I think is common for people who keep sketchbooks. But I don't often do all of my design work on paper. So I'm using sketchbooks to kind of brainstorm, come up with little ideas. This is my version of her little character here at the top. And then started to just think about ways I wanted to attach different characters, different themes on fire, the stripes. And for me, since I don't work as strongly in the 2D, I'm really just using it as a reference. And so as a glassblower that has to work with other people instead of working by myself, I often use those simple sketches just as a communication tool with my gaffer or my assistants for the day. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that. We were talking about those, but I guess also the way that I approach a lot of design work is just in glass itself. So these are really rough and tumble clear bottles, but when we first started talking about some of the processes that we were going to do. I would go out to do a demo, I could sketch out a really quick piece in clear, and then bring it back to Caitlin and have a conversation about, well, these are some of the shapes I was thinking about, this is some of the discoveries I made while I was making those clear pieces, because I find a lot of information is translated back and forth for myself in the act of making those objects.
Right.
So this is just a couple examples of my sketching in clear that brought us to, I wanted to mimic some of the buttons that you had on your figures. We were looking at wings. We were thinking about different kind of horns and additions. But this is the things that I kind of scaled away from the process. Once we started really pairing these things together, I found some of this a little too heavy-handed, a little unnecessary, because you were putting so many great details into the character themselves. I didn't feel like it needed as much on the bottle itself.
But you can also see the kind of cartoon, fat, rounded cartoon character of the sketch bottles. And that's where, it became clear by putting them together that how they would interact with each other and have that sort of humorous, lively feel to them. So yeah, I do draw a lot, and Helen said she uses her sketches as a communication tool. I think of them that way too. I communicate with my brain by putting things on paper, because what I find is if I think and think and think, things get a little bit crowded in there, and if I put it out on paper, then I've got something to interact with, just like with Helen's bottles, where that becomes something that you can look at outside of your own head, and then start having that flow of ideas because it's not just in your head. So yeah, so drawing is important to me, but it's important as a thought, as part of my process, and my characters in glass look a lot like my characters in drawing. But that process that we've been talking about all along of making things, looking at the other person's work, responding to it, that's all part of that same idea of developing an idea, design idea by repeatedly approaching it and examining it.
Yeah, I feel like my drawings very rarely match my finished product. But that's just I'm using it as, again, a communication tool, but even a communication tool for myself. I kind of rough out those ideas, but I do find my best work and best visuals in the 3D rather than in the 2D.
Well, and I don't draw something and then make that exact thing, but there is a sort of kinship between the way that I draw, because it's thinking about imagery.
Right.
So I've got a little imp pretty well underway here. I'm going to give him some tiny little mittens.
Mittens? Cute.
It is, of course, possible to make amazing, delicate little hands with fingers. What I think about that for this particular character is that it suits him better to have mittens, and you will see me adding a thumb. So if you're kind of wondering what it would be like to make a whole bunch of fingers, it would be just like making the thumb, only more times, and more opportunities for it to melt away as you're shaping it.
Yeah, I often gravitate towards more of that mitten look, especially if you're working, maybe putting something in its hands, kind of implying the fingers, but not necessarily doing the individuals. Such a small scale, it's really hard to get those in the right place and not have them just round up and look like mittens anyways. But I'm going to start out with my second bottle now, and instead of doing an overlay, I'm just going to pick the color up directly onto the pipe. So I did make a small collar, just a hollow bit of glass, blew through the end, cut off the excess. So it's kind of like having a clear donut on the end of my pipe. That just helps me adhere that color to the end a little easier. And also keeps the pipe from getting too much color on it itself. It's always a little frustrating when you go to gather over a pipe and make an object and you've got residual color from somebody else's past project floating into your piece. So it's a nice courtesy for the future user of these pipes. But I often choose whether I'm using an overlay process or whether I pick it up directly on the pipe, sometimes based on the color itself and sometimes based on, of course, the appearance that I want for it. And often I'll make the distinction between whether I'm going to touch something to the inside. So if I'm making a bowl or a wide open form where I'm actually going to be flaring it open, looking at the inside quality of the surface, then I will for certain overlay that glass just to help protect the color from being manipulated. But for these bottles, they're pretty tightly closed. I'm not too worried about what's going on the inside, so I can just pick up the color directly and save myself a few steps.
So I'm adding some little nubs for the horns here. They're going to start out round, of course, because glass flows into round shapes when you melt it. You got to melt it to attach it. So the thought process is always about how much glass am I going to attach, where am I going to attach it, and then what am I going to do to change it to the shape that I want, and when am I going to do that so that I don't end up accidentally remelting it. And so you're going to see me, especially with some of these details, kind of popping from one part to the other and then coming back again to some of the earlier parts. Like right now I'm heating just the inside of that one mitten. And it's not because I get bored easily, it's because I'm using that alternating approach to manage the heat. There are times when I need something to cool off before I can take the next step. Lots of times there's heat in the glass, but it's not in the right place. And so waiting for something to cool is a really important part of the process, and sometimes a little hard to choose to do because you feel like you're not taking an action. And that's one of the reasons I like to work on another part while I'm waiting for something to cool. So just adding some tiny little thumbs here.
That's such a great point, Caitlin. You'll often hear glassmakers talk about temperature management, and it depends on what we're working on, but a lot of times we'll be reheating something over and over and over again, and often that is to establish that core heat or get the temperature right where you need it. And from an outside perspective, it often looks like nothing's really happening. A lot of people will say during our demonstrations, nothing's changing for the last 10 minutes. It doesn't look like you're doing anything, but really, glassmakers know how to work the heat into something and get it just right. And that is really the foundation of how to manipulate this material, is getting it to move where you want it to, when you want it to, and building that heat where you need it. And when you watch skilled glassmakers like Caitlin and Helen, it looks like everything just does what they want it to do, but there's years and years of training and know-how that builds up into that. Hey, Brad, can we roll that gathering animation? I don't think this is something that we've showed during this live stream, but we have a really cool animation, thank you very much, that shows what Helen's about to do in just a moment. In this melting furnace, this is where it starts for us, for glass blowing, where we melt our soda lime glass, the clear glass, at 2,100 Fahrenheit. There's a lot of different styles of furnaces and ovens. This one has a ceramic crucible inside of it that's able to hold 1,000 pounds if we were to fill it. Right now, it looks like there's probably about maybe 600-700 pounds in there. But that process is called gathering. And at 2,100 Fahrenheit, that soda lime glass has the same viscosity, almost identical to table honey. So when we take a blowpipe, in this case with that little bit of blue color on the end, and we dip into that furnace, plunging into the molten glass, we have to turn very smoothly in one direction and then kind of pitch level with the blowpipe to catch that molten material. And from that point on, we never really stopped turning.
What's the best troubleshooting skill you use in glassmaking the most? Best
I've put my little imp in the oven to just
Best troubleshooting
rest
skill
for a minute and warm up, even out the temperature. And while it is in there, I'm going to make one of the little flames.
Where to find my coffee?
I've got some flames already prepared, and when I'm making, and there's going to be two of them on this sculpture, and what I find is that if I need to make two things that match, like two flames or two wings, the best way for me to get there is to make a bunch of them and then pick out the ones that seem to go together the best. And so I'm making a flame here, so if you want to, you can see how I'm doing that, but I've got two that are already prepared that are the ones I'm going to attach.
So we had a question online that all of us are like, it's what is the most common troubleshooting techniques you use while you're making glass or working with this material? And I think that would hark for me back to what Caitlin was just talking about, is that sequence of events. There's so often that if I've never made a piece, for example, we're doing every other Wednesday, we do the You Design It program. So we do not have a practice run of those. We basically figure out how to do it and then make it happen all during that 2-hour time slot. So for me, it's really trying to come up with the sequence of events before you get going as much as possible, because if you don't prepare ahead of time that sequence of events, then you're going to find yourself with, needing an extra hand and not having it, or having things prepared, or needing something additional. So I think that sequence of events, not just in coming up with the final project, but the heat management, the sequence of events that brings you to the final effect. If I put one little detail on there 2 steps too early, well, then I'm going to lose that detail, and it's going to melt out. But if I know it's something delicate or really spindly, I'll wait to put that on at the very end of the process, and then that way I don't end up losing the detail by the end. So I guess that's my troubleshooting, is to try to troubleshoot in advance.
Excellent answer, Helen. What about you, Caitlin? Are there any troubleshooting techniques you like to employ for pieces that you're working on?
Yeah, I think knowing that you can fail at any moment is a good troubleshooting technique, and not minding it. So that's one of the things I think glass has taught me over and over again, is I'm never absolutely in control of it, and I have to coax it to do what I want, and sometimes it's not going to behave quite the way I want. And so my tactics are different depending on what I'm working on. If I'm doing a demo at the museum, which is often 15 or 20 minutes, and people are standing and watching, if I'm in the middle of making a little animal or something like that, and something strange happens, like it breaks or it has a weird looking tail or something like that, often I'll just continue, because it's all about the demo and not so much about the final object. But if I'm working in my own studio and I'm trying to make something that's a finished object, often I will start over. And that's kind of suits my approach to working with glass, which is often about making small parts and then assembling them. If I make a part that's not quite what I want, I can make another one. And so that's sort of my philosophy, is just keep making more.
And I think that's one of the great advantages that we have here as gaffers for the museum, is that we're doing hundreds of shows in a week, and so we get an opportunity. If you don't really quite get it right the first time, well, there's another demo in another 45 minutes. You can maybe try that process again, or try a different approach and different design. For some things, I guess, at least. But it is really fun to have that freedom to kind of repeat yourself over and over. And you do learn every time you make an object from that prior experience. But often in our shows, yes, if a mistake happens, we can't just give up at the time. So it does give you a certain strength to keep moving forward and realizing it's not necessary that every single piece works out exactly. It's all sometimes the process and learning and sharing what you love with the audiences that come to see us. And it's really nice when it works out, but you really learn a lot just from when it doesn't work out. Then you figure out what you did wrong and be able to build from there.
Yeah. It keeps your brain pretty active, I think. Always thinking about, okay, how could I do that differently? How could I do it better? So here's a little flame that is made up of several layers. I've got clear glass and 2 different shades of red in there, and I've stretched it out a little bit. It ends up looking kind of like a flamey claw, which I kind of like. And that is not the one I'm going to attach, but that's just so you can see the steps of the process if you want to. And then I've got a couple of flames that are a little smaller that I'm actually going to attach to this sculpture.
We had a question online earlier about, I guess maybe more of a comment, that glassmakers are always looking for stress points in glass. And we can take that in 2 different directions. One, as we're making an object when it's hot, we can look at stress points, and when you have delicate connections at times, then those delicate connections can be stress points and they can break very easily. So we have to learn how to not break those points while we're working. And if you look at a lot of, I like to reference Venetian goblets a lot because there's a lot of different parts that go into many of those, and there's very delicate connections. And what you'll see Helen and I do once we get to a certain stage with this again, with her bottle, is transfer it to that handle called a punty. So we intentionally create a stress point, a constriction, where we'll break the glass free. And anytime you go to break an object free from a pipe or a punty, the glass wants to break at the weakest point. So you have to learn how to make those stress points and how to control the other areas that you don't want to break free. I don't know if that addresses the question or the comment that the person had in mind or not.
Yes, thanks for so many questions. This is great. I think we all really love these live streams, these opportunities to show off some of the techniques and the things that we're really proud of. But I really love that now we can reach audiences from wherever. So we can have folks tuning in from all around the world and getting those questions. It's been really fun. Especially with that You Design It program. That was something we traditionally only did in-house, and now this year we're able to do that over the internet. Maybe Chris can talk a little bit more about that program.
Yeah, the You Design It program is a lot of fun. So every Wednesday from now on until our summer schedule begins, Memorial Day, we're doing a special live stream event here in our amphitheater from 10 till noon. And starting right now with Helen and Caitlin, this is our Bring the Heat series, one of our newer series, sort of showcasing our artists here and allowing them to work on something that they've come up with. And every other Wednesday, the You Design It, We Make It program is where we select, one of our teams selects a drawing or a design that's been submitted online by anybody in the world, and we create that design in glass in the amphitheater. It's a program that we've done for many, many years now. We have elaborated on it. We have expanded it to a degree in terms of giving us more time and resource to work on it. But it's a lot of fun as well because we'll contact the designer, whoever created it, and allow them to either come to the museum and watch it being made live, or they can tune in on the live feed. And ultimately, when the piece is complete, we either have that designer come and pick the piece up, or we'll ship it out to them for a fee. Well, we've seen a lot of really, really fun designs throughout the years. It's such a blast for our team to be able to work on them. You heard Helen talking earlier about we don't have really any time to practice those pieces, which is true, so you can plan it out. We have a little bit of time to prep components if we need to, but we select those designs usually a couple days in advance. Do you want a small counterweight for that one?
A 3/4 would be good since we're
as well?
sculpting on this one.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
But anybody that's watching right now, please tell your friends and include yourselves. Anybody that you know that's interested in that, you just go to cmog.org, our website, and click on the You Design It link, and you'll see an area where you can upload images, and there's an area where you can write your description, what inspired you to come up with that design, why you'd like to see it made, and all that fun stuff. I'm not sure what the theme is for the
I was just trying to
next one.
remember. I know there's one with monsters coming up. Amanda, do you by chance remember what the theme for next week is? Yeah, there's so many good themes. It changes every session. We just had fairy tales, and we've had friendly monsters. I think my favorite one, though, I did on the ship, and I've told this story before, but I'll share it now because it's so much fun. But we were doing You Design It with some international folks, and there was a double-decker bus. And I had never made a double-decker bus, so I chose that one. I thought it would look like a lot of fun, a good challenge. I like a good challenge. So we were putting together this double-decker bus. I put the driver in there. I had people in the windows. And we get all finished. And the little 4-year-old that had drawn the design, we always check in with our designer. And I said, what do you think? He said, I love it, but you put the driver on the wrong side. So he was a young man from England. And I just wasn't thinking straight when I put that together. So it's always fun part of that challenge of interpreting the drawings, and really children and of all ages that can apply for this, but there's so much creativity that goes into it. And just like this collaboration here that I'm doing with Caitlin, I really love having other folks to play off of for design things. So I find that program in particular really a lot of fun. And sometimes I get them right, sometimes I put the driver on the wrong side, but it's always a fun adventure.
I'd like to point out as well that we have catalogs of all those videos on our YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and
Thanks.
search the Corning Museum of Glass, you'll see past videos that have been uploaded after the fact, and it's a great way to really see all the content that our program has offered here. Not all of it, but quite a bit of it anyway.
So once I get this trimmed up, this particular bottle is one that is going to be a little bit more sculptural. And there's a few items that are a few designs that I came up with to work with Caitlin's angels, and one of them was a garden angel, and it has this beautiful little flower on the top. So I did make a garden bottle that's on the color cart there, or the gas cart there. And that, I wanted the flowers, I wanted to put a black vine on it to kind of bring that slightly not so good side that Caitlin was looking for, finding those contrasts and comparisons. And when she started to make these characters have wings, it really started to make me think about putting them into environments. And I often love to design objects or environments for the objects that I'm making. So if I'm going to make, say, a fish, I'm not just going to make a fish that stands by itself. I'll most likely make a fish that is sitting in an ocean theme or on a coral reef or something of that nature. I really love taking sculptural elements into everything I do that I have an opportunity to add it to, because that's really where my first love is in glass, is working in more of a sculptural form. So I really wanted to gravitate towards this idea of the sky and clouds. So this is a blue bottle that I'm working with. And we're going to add some little clouds onto the side with solid glass. But I've got one little extra step. I'm going to trim that one more time, Chris, just to thin that out a little bit. And thinking of that idea that there's, with every positive, there's always an alternate side as well, and they can live in harmony together, I'm going to put a little bit of rain on one of those clouds. And so we've pre-fused a couple little pieces of cane together. I did that before the show because just as we were talking about that sequence of events and troubleshooting that you need to figure out, well, during our rehearsal, I figured out that we didn't have enough hands to be able to fuse those together and get them onto the piece. So I made those in advance. So we've got a little less stressful action on the floor at the time.
And that's the fourth stripe technique, by the way, that we.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you got some things to show for sure.
No, yours, your raindrops. That's that's the fourth striping technique.
Yes, fourth striping technique. That's right. We're using a lot of striping techniques today. All right, Chris, we can go ahead and get that going.
Okay.
So I'm going to set that bit of rain onto the piece here.
You gonna flash one more time?
I'm just going to flash one more time, and then if you set that down, I'll be able to hand this over to you.
Got it.
And I'm getting ready to add some wings at this point. I made a wing so that you could see the process. Pretty much the same steps as I did for the
Got it, Helen.
flames, except just as I was shaping it, bending it a little differently. But I have a pair of wings that I set up ahead of time because I want to join them both to the imp together. And as I mentioned, if I need a pair of things that match, it's a good idea if I make several of them and then pick the ones that match the best. So got my wings ready to attach. When I'm attaching parts like this, I'm often going to do it in 2 stages. I'm going to put a little attachment pad on there, and that's because in order to make a good stable connection, I need to really make sure the parts flow together.
Thank you.
I don't want the
don't
wings
want that
to
on the
get too soft while I'm working, or they can start moving around a lot. So I'm putting kind of a little landing pad on there, and since it's a simple shape, it's easy to make sure that it's well sealed in place. Add a little bit of heat to the rest of the body to try to avoid those stress situations that build up if things get too uneven in temperature. Borosilicate is very resilient, it's very resistant to thermal stress, but it is still very possible to shock it and end up with a breaking, especially because I've got all these different parts that are very different thicknesses at this point. And right toward the end of the process is where it becomes more and more likely to end up with stress cracks.
All right, so managed to get those little stripes on there. So this is a light bit of green glass, and it's a similar green to what Caitlin has been using for some of her characters. So that's another way of trying to get these to really match aesthetically, choosing similar colors, staying within the theme, and putting a little bit of that good and not so good in every piece that we do.
You ready for this, Helen?
Yep.
We're
So this is
applying.
just a little bit of alabaster glass that I'm adding to create some clouds. Oh, we need 3 of those though, sorry. Yeah, I just want 1 rain cloud, but three clouds. Now, another conversation that we had the other day that I thought was an important point to bring up is the idea of undercuts in glass. And for me, at doing sculpture, I just added this big blob onto my form, and it's got all kinds of undercuts, and it's not really a concern. But when you're working with the borosilicate, that becomes a major concern, doesn't it, Caitlin?
Right. Anytime you have a sort of V-shaped connection, it's very inclined to create a crack in the glass. And so even though I'm always looking for ways to make things look very crisp and kind of geometric, any connection that I make, I have to be very aware of getting it to have a little curve to it. And so often it's not a curve that you can even see necessarily, but as you're attaching the parts, you have to make sure that they're absolutely flowing. And often I will stretch them a little bit as I'm finishing the attachment too, and then that helps to just soften up that curve and make the glass a lot more relaxed and allow it to survive better.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of cross-training lately, learning how to work with borosilicate to be able to demonstrate here at the museum and learn new skills and processes, and I think that's definitely been something it took me a while to really grasp hold of, how to melt those pieces in, being a soft glass worker and used to not really having that as being a concern. I definitely had a lot of broken things when I first started.
Yeah, me too. I still do. And especially because a lot of it's about timing. And when you're thinking about an idea and you're developing the design and experimenting, your sense of timing is not always spot on for the glass. And so, that goes to that idea that repeating things a number of times is where you start to be able to develop the thought a little bit better, because then you're not struggling with the technical aspects as much.
All right, so I've got all my clouds and everything. I'm just going to flash this down so we get ready to put it away into our oven.
I've got some wings and a little short tail. I'd like to make the tail a little bit longer. The challenge is that putting the tail in, I haven't quite firmed up my approach to getting a tail and wings in place without one or the other melting or breaking. And typically, if I was making a tail on any object, I would be making it in one stretching maneuver as opposed to adding glass partway through. But I couldn't quite manage that with this one. And so this will be a bit of an experiment to see if I can add glass and still get a nice smooth stretch to the tail. I just want the tail long enough that you can see it from the front.
Yeah, this is kind of the first rain bottle that we've really done. I think I like this technique. Might have to try this again.
Yep, we're going to definitely have to keep working on these.
Just starting a long tradition of collaboration with Caitlin. I like the idea. So in our oven it goes for safekeeping, slow cooling. And I can't wait to see some characters on top of those tomorrow when it gets nice and cold.
And so here is the character that's ready to go on to the red one anyhow.
Awesome.
Well, I think we're done, aren't we?
I think so. That brought us to a nice completion. What a beautiful collaboration. Hopefully everyone enjoyed it online. Remember, it'll be on our YouTube channel as well.
And thanks for those of you who are here, and for those of you who are here online as well. Thanks for being with us.
Yes, thanks so much. And again to Chris and Amanda and Brad for helping us out today. Join us every Wednesday again. And of course, come and visit in person if you have an opportunity. We've got so many things happening here at the Corning Museum of Glass. We're excited to see you come and visit. So thanks so much for tuning in, and have a great day.